savings. And then what is the last one? Pardon? Yeah, so it's going to be imports. Okay, I'm going to draw a plane. Now, more broadly, these are our leakages because they are leaving, yeah? So if you're thinking of a bucket, it's got a hole in the bucket, that money is going away. That is bad for our GDP, yeah, because we are not getting that money back just yet, okay? Now, once this happens, well, let's start from the top. What does the government do with our taxes? They spend it, yeah? So we have spending here, gov spending. And then we have investments. And then we have exports. These here are our injections. If you remember my cursed meme that I pumped like heaps of Botox into my face, yeah, injections, it fills it up. And then this entire thing here, what is that called? AD. Amazing. Okay, I tell my kids the AD formula, it's kind of like the mitochondria is a powerhouse of the cell, or like Y equals mx plus c. You'll just never forget this, unfortunately. So if you do continue on with echo, if you don't, I promise you, you'll just remember AD equals amazing. That was so enthusiastic. Does anyone know why imports is minus here but not anywhere else? Yeah.
Because imports aren't Australia made.
Yes, so imports aren't Australia made, correct. But why don't I take, taxes out of, government spending? Why is this really only subtraction? Why imports comes from that? Because it's assumed that things like consumption, I might be spending my money overseas, like me personally, I might be buying vinyl records of Discogs from overseas. So there is some kind of leakage in the consumption. However, you can't subtract it twice because then it will double up and it won't work. So we just subtract imports from exports. Cool. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Is Australia a net exporter or a net importer? Net exporter, yeah, that means we push out more stuff than we bring in, which is good, okay? Sweet. I'm going quick, but any questions so far? All right, I'm just going to get rid of all this. Oh, sorry. So with imports, there is some level of imports being taken away out of consumption here, as well as taxes and things like that. So if we subtract it from here as well, then you're kind of doubling up with the subtraction. So it overpowers.
Can we go for an example?
Yeah.
October last year, I bought my new car, first new car ever. It's very exciting. Thank you.
Electric.
Ooh. Hybrid. Teacher salary, can't afford electric. And that car cost me $47,000. So I handed $47,000 over to Honda Brighton. Yeah? Where does that go? Which letter? It's C, because did I import the car? No. So $47,000 goes here. But was there $47,000 worth of production here in Australia? No, the car was made in Japan. And so when Honda Brighton bought that car from their factory in Japan, that would have cost them money. Let's say it cost them $40,000 from the factory in Japan. But there was some work done here in Australia. They bought it in for me. They took me for a test drive. They, bugged me to buy the bloody thing. Or there was work done in Australia. How much work was done in Australia? $7,000. That's why we minus it away. Cool.
And then, hey, wait, you buy really fancy cars, there's luxury car tax, and then the actual car worth is really not that much. Anyway, that's a different point. So, can I rub it off? Going. Cool. Yeah.
It doesn't matter how pages
All right, I'm just going to jump into the business cycle.
Hey everyone!
What goes here? GDP. Then why the bloody hell didn't you write GDP on your practice apps?
Did you guys enjoy having to graph? Yeah, no. Neither did the U3AOS last year, but yes. So, with that in mind, we have, you know what?
What are the stages?
Alright. Thank you, everybody. Can somebody please tell me what this blue line is called? Yeah, more specifically though, what is this blue line called? Yes, this is the whole thing. We go through the business cycle. Anyone know? It is aggregate demand. Yeah? And then we'll have this red line. What do we reckon? If the blue line's AD, what's the red line? I'll give you guys a clue.
Hat!
Aggregate supply, okay? So, the first thing to note is aggregate demand is more short term, yeah, and has fluctuations, where aggregate supply is long term. Now, I feel like that makes sense because, you know, consumer preferences and things like that change. It could be economic activity change, yeah, and it takes time for firms to respond to that. So whether it be importing cars from overseas, whether it be just hiring people to the new demand, yeah, it takes time for the supply in this country to match the demand in this country. So with that in mind, we have kind of a few points. Where do we want to start? Let's start at this point here. Let's label this number one. What is number one? A peak. Cool. What's going on at a peak? Unemployment. We think unemployment is going to be high or low? Awesome. Unemployment is low. Inflation, high. Cool. And then we're going to move maybe, you know what, I'm just going to make this a bit, sorry if you've already drawn that, that's all right. Now we're kind of going in this direction here. This is going to be our number two. What's going on? It's a contraction, yeah? Okay, so 2 is contraction, also known as a downturn. Both are fine, okay? What's going on with unemployment following the peak? It's starting to increase. Okay, hey, another thing as well, just always write unemployment. I tend to forget to do that, and then you end up with like double negatives and that kind of stuff. Just refer to unemployment, don't say employment, because you'll get confused, trust me. And then what's happening with inflation? Can I have a word to describe the inflation rate in this period? Disinflation, cool. The way I describe it to my students is, hey, guess what? It still has the word inflation in it, which means there is still some economic growth. It is just at a lower rate. So this number or percentage is still going to be positive. It's just above 0. Cool. And then we're down here. Number 3. We're going to move over here. What's going on number 3? Trough. Cool. Do we think people are going to be employed during a trough? No. Yeah? Unemployment is high. Now, one thing I forgot to mention as well is, what's it called when you are fired from your job or you become unemployed due to what's going on in the business cycle. I'll give you a clue. Yeah, it's got the word cycle in it. It's called cyclical unemployment. So, and that comes back to unemployment, yeah. Cool. And then inflation is low. Or we might even have deflation. Okay? Where there is a reduction in the growth and it's below zero. So we have a negative number. And then our last one's going to be, what's our last one? We've gone from here, and then where are we going? Yeah, expansion, cool. Unemployment starts to decline, and then inflation starts to pick up again. But one thing as well I'll mention again from here is, why do we think once we've hit a peak, we kind of start to go back down? I'll give you a clue. Has involved inflation. So we're at a peak. Why might economic activity start to slow down again? What's a consequence of high inflation? Starts with a P. Purchasing power. Yeah, we don't have as much purchasing power. We can't really afford to buy goods and services. So people might leave the market, therefore economic activity slows down. Exact same, but the opposite, when we hit a trough, if there is deflation or disinflation, yeah, we have more purchasing power, which then encourages more economic activity, and then we just go in that cycle. Anything you want to add, Mr. Graham?
Yeah, I was just having a look at the study design. Obviously, the study design is where we and your exam creators draw their questions from. And for business cycle, it's the business cycle, comma, and its causes. And what it means by that is exactly what Mr. Price was going through, and it's this stuff. Yeah, so the questions for there will more be like, you know, what's a cause of a moving towards a trough, or recovering from a trough, or moving away from peak, or exactly the things that Mr. Price was saying, that the study design says causes as well. And so you've got to understand beyond just GDP, what are the other economic indicators doing at this stage to make things go up or down? Okay, and inflation, as he said, is the key driver behind that. Too expensive, we buy less stuff, so we make less stuff. Our wages now have outpaced the rate of inflation. We buy more stuff. They make more stuff. It's really as simple as that.
Cool, cool. Do you want to jump into ADS?
Sweet. Okay. Yes. So, ADAS. We made you guys little bookmarks. Yep. It's really interesting. I was commenting to Mr. Price about this earlier, that there's so many resources that you have available to you that it's hard to kind of remember when to use them. Yeah, and so at its core, this outcome is about those AD and AS factors changing, and then stuff happens. At its core, that's kind of the bulk of it. And we're going to get into the goal stuff a little bit later. But a lot of conversations I've been having over the last couple of days, especially with the practice sacks, we've kind of forgotten when to use the factors. Yeah, and I've had lots and lots and lots of students with that particular perspective. And so generally speaking, I don't think I need to go into what the factors are. I don't think. Maybe I will, just very briefly. But I think the more important thing is when to use them, which obviously I'll talk a little bit about in answer structures. But let's just take our minds back to core principles of, we have two lists of factors, and in economics and also in maths and other subjects. But in economics, a factor is something that will have an impact upon something else. So a factor in your quality education is how much time you spend outside of classroom working on economics. If you spend lots of time working on economics, that's going to have an effect on something else. So that's what we mean by factor. And then we've got two sides of the economy with AD and AS factors. AD being things or scenarios that when they change, it's going to change levels of spending. So I'll say that again. Your AD factors, yes, there's a list of them and they're at the top of your bookmark and all that stuff. But I think as a cohort, and I've got a lot of you, as a cohort, we need to kind of go past what's the second mark in this answer structure thing, and just take a step back sometimes and just be like, what am I actually talking about here? And for aggregate demand, what that is if something changes in the economy and it's going to change the spending behaviours of consumers, businesses, governments, things that we export, and things that we import, well then you're going to go down what we call an AD pathway. Yeah, you're going to talk about AD stuff, which I'm going to go through in a little bit now. AD spending. Because there was a question on the practice SAP which was around the internet speeds. And I had a lot of students kind of like going, where do I start with that? And the first question you're going to ask yourself is, does this affect the spending of any of those? Or does it affect the willingness and ability for firms to supply? It's kind of like your first triage question. You guys know the word triage? You go to the hospital, they'll be like, what's wrong with you? And they'll put you either, where the broken bones people go, or the burns people go, or the whingy, you just need to get a Panadol people go. They'll triage you. They'll split you off. And so your first question when it's economic scenarios is this going to change spending or ability, willingness to supply? Cool? So that's the first thing. Take a step back sometimes, because I think there's so much stuff in this outcome. Have a look at it. First outcome, which was actually more marks, was that many key knowledge points. And this one, which is slightly less marks, has all of that. And so we can kind of get a little bit lost in the weeds. Yeah, we're sometimes a little too micro. I just need you to step back. You know your content, you know your stuff.
It's April and we're already at the end of this unit, or area study, halfway through the book.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
We're about 200 pages in and the book's 412.
It's so content heavy at the start. It really, really is. And so just like, take a step back. Oh, well, if internet's faster, well, that's going to benefit businesses. So then, which are my factors? And you maybe look at productivity. And you can kind of take a more common sense approach. Now, there's no such thing as common sense, by the way. Common sense is just accumulated knowledge that you think of without thinking. But I need you to get a little bit more of that in your, you're approaching the questions. All right, so factors. Let's whip through them. I want to add a factor for you. I want to add discretionary income. The VCAR rules for all of your subjects, not just economics, but for all of your subjects state, if you write something that's true, but outside the scope of the study design, it's accepted. And a lot of the scenarios that we give you don't directly change any of the factors. And the ones I'm mainly thinking about are interest rates, and the other thing that was in the practice. Interest rates and, the fuel prices one that we had in the practice stack. Is that the practice stack? No, the weekly practice question. We said fuel prices. Oil prices which lead to fuel prices. So let's just very quickly actually go through that, because it's probably not in your notes to any great degree. You have this thing called gross income, ew. I make that joke every time. Gross income, no, it's not ew. It comes from the German word for big, which is gross. And it means the big income, which is the money that leaves the bank account of your employer. Cool? Gross income. We then take away tax and we add in transfers. I'm sorry, we're both very loud teachers. You're like, I'm going to stay back today and do a bit of extra work. You're like, well, maybe not today.
That's all right, we're used to it.
Yeah, true. Oh, it's only Vico in here. Very noisy.
VM, thank you.
Sorry, VM. Gross income. Victor Crumb's cousin. No. Gross income minus tax plus transfers will equal what we call our disposable. Cool. Just as a summary, this is government stuff.
So if I own a house, my home loan, like interest rates increase, has my disposable income changed? No.
It doesn't actually.
You can't use that interchangeably.
And so this is where, and I'll be completely honest with you, in marking the exam in the past, if students use disposable but instead of discretionary, we haven't docked a mark, but as I'll always say, I don't want you to give your assessor the tiniest clue that you are not an expert in economics. And so by using discretionary income correctly, you kind of push your assessor towards being like, woo, full marks. Cool.
Technically, can we argue that because of the increase in interest rates, we increase home loan repayments, which allows for more deductions from our income tax? Like negative.
Only if it's an investment property.
Okay, fair.
Everybody else, ignore what Sandy said, it'll confuse you.
Housing.
So we need to go one step further, and we need to get to this thing called discretionary income. And how we do that is we take our disposable income and we take away our key expenses. Think of the things you don't have a choice to pay. For a lot of us in the room, I hope you pay your school contribution because that enables us to do all these amazing things to your school. But that would be something that would be a key expense. Fuel. I can't choose to fill up my tank or not. I have to. And so if the price of that goes up, well, I've got less money for everything else, and that's where you get into private consumption. Cool. If interest rates go up, more of my income, more of my disposable income here is now going to the bank. And so if I earn, I don't know, $3,000 a week, and I had $1,000 going into the bank, well, I've got $2,000 left over. Sorry, I've got $2,000 left over. But now if I have $3,000 of disposable income and $1,500 goes to the bank, well, now I've only got $1,500 less to spend. I've got $500 less that I am spending on goods and services. C falls, AD falls, blah, 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 blah. Cool. So I would encourage you to start using this term correctly. And your clue is not government stuff. If it's a not government stuff as your cause term, do you use that language, cause and effect terms? Yep. If it's not government stuff, it's likely going to change discretionary income. All right, let's talk about the factors. Starting with the AD ones. So we just talked about disposable income. Interest rates, I'm liking what I'm seeing in most of my responses that you're writing on your definition of interest rates for detail. Don't just say it's the cost of borrowing money. I like you to add on, and the reward for saving. Now let's go back in time about 20 minutes to Mr. Price's explanation of the 5-sector circular flow. Within the financial sector, what was the leakage? What was that called? Savings. And so this is a really easy way for you to make a link from interest rates to private consumption, because you can say, instead of spending money, well, there's an incentive now for people to leave their money in the bank because they're getting a high rate of return on that, the reward for saving. So you're not actually learning new information in that case, you're just connecting ideas. And if my money's in the bank, it's not being spent, private consumption falls, blah, 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 blah. So I'd much prefer you use that extended definition if you can. Consumer confidence. The chief assessor every year in the economics exam hates that students just fall back on consumer confidence all the time. It's a bit of an easy cop-out for a lot of your cause factors. Do they get the marks? Yeah. But again, I don't want you to be the average student. We want you to be the best students. And so there was a question on interest rates, I think, in the practice act. I think, yes? Yep. A lot of students said an increase in interest rates will decrease consumer confidence. Sure. Everything changes consumer confidence, though, if you actually think about it. And so it's a bit of a cop-out. So to stick with interest rates, go to that next level, talk about how there's a reward for saving. And so with increased savings, there's more leakages from the economy, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, be more specific. I'd avoid just falling back on that one if you can. If you can't think of anything else, if you can't think of a connection to another AD factor, sure. But I don't want you to be good, we want you to be great. Call back to the people I had last year in Year 11 economics. Business confidence. Which category is business confidence? Which category is business confidence in? AD factors or AS? AD. So what mistake do you think a lot of students make in the exam when they talk about business confidence? They link it to AS.
Why is it AD? Because what are they doing?
We reckon no?
They're consuming, not as business.
Businesses buy stuff too. This is the I component. So if me as a business is not confident about my liquidity, so those that do accounting, you can bring that into it. Okay. My liquidity, my ability to, with my short-term assets to pay my bills. This is essentially it. The ability, perceived ability to pay my bills. Then maybe I won't do that factory extension. Maybe I might buy cheaper materials that cost less money. All of this decreasing private investment, the I letter of the formula. So please be careful with business investment. It's tempting to link to ability or willingness, and that's not what we're doing. Cool. Exchange rate's a bit of a weird one, because where else does exchange rate occur? On the AS side. So on the odd occasion that you do get exchange rates in a question, it will either tell you on the demand side of the economy or on the supply side of the economy. If it doesn't, just pick one and run with it. Cool? And this is how they're different. So on the AD side, so this is for, we're going to get used to referring to exchange rates as FX in the next outcome, which stands for foreign exchange. But for exchange rates on the AD side, I want you to imagine you as consumers. It's the easier way to go. And I'm sorry for those in my class, but there's some here who are not in my class. And so they need to see the beautiful acting of Mr. Graham. And if we say there is a depreciation in our exchange rate, does our currency get stronger or weaker? Our currency gets stronger or weaker? Which one? It's weaker. Now, if someone is weaker in a running race, do they go further or not as far? They go not as far, and it's the same with the currency. So if a t-shirt is $100 and our currency gets weaker, are we going to need more or less of our currency? We're going to need more of it. So the price of imports go up. The Australian price of imports go up. And if our currency is weaker relative, what is the American currency? Weaker or stronger compared to ours? It's stronger, so they need more or less of their currency. They need less, so do they buy more or less of our stuff? More, because it's cheaper. So imports go up, the price of imports, price of exports go down for those customers. And the combined effect of this is with the price of imports rising, I know this actually looks very confusing, because if the price of exports rise, what happens to the actual value of exports? Yeah, which then leads to a decrease in total imports. Because our American friends, are they buying our stuff anymore? No. They're going to buy it from Spain or from Portugal or from China. Similarly, If our exports, our coal, our iron, through the exchange rate gets cheaper, are they going to buy from us or from Chile? If we're cheaper, they're going to buy from us. So our total exports go up. Both of those combined increase AD. Cool? They both have the same directional effect. My recommendation to you is don't argue both exports and imports. You're going to trip yourself up. Just pick one of those arguments that you feel most comfortable with and run with that. Okay?
So if you were to get a question that asks you about like the effect of exchange rates on aggregate demand,
Yep.
would you choose one of those pathways?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would pick this or that. The only exception would be if it was like a big mark question, but I showed you how much that is accessible in this outcome, and there is something on every key knowledge point in your SAC next week. So we're not going to burn 6 marks on both. You know what I mean? For one of the AD factors. And they don't do that. What's that? Spoiler alert, but they don't do that in the exam. Yeah, they're going to do the big chunky ones. Cool, so that's on the AD side. On the AS side, you really need to put your AS hat on. So if you're pushed towards the AS side for exchange rate, you just got to think, how does this actually affect the behaviour of suppliers? And the danger here is you think that this is going to affect my willingness and ability to sell. That is not your argument here. Your argument on the AS side is a change in, for those that didn't have me last year and don't have me this year, triangle delta change in cost of production. Therefore, only import price. That's all you need to talk about here. Because even McKinnon, actually bad example, if you are a building company, you're probably going to buy your concrete bags from an overseas producer. We don't make concrete much here in Australia. And so as a result, if we see a depreciation of the exchange rate, does our currency get stronger or weaker? Not a rhetorical question. Thank you. And so are those building companies going to need more or less of their Australian currency? More. And that's all you go to. Yeah? If you start saying, oh, so then they change their consumption to locally sourced concrete, what are you doing? Yeah, you're talking the AD effect, and that's not what we're doing here. Ability and willingness to supply. This is always going to change the willingness only. And it's literally just, is this going to increase cost of production or decrease? Increase, so therefore AS goes down. Done. Cool?
Just to go that again, so they're called intermediate goods, where it's, not in the final sale. So it wouldn't be Mr. Graham's car. It would be, yes, like building materials, stuff you're buying overseas to help sell your final product in Australia. So it's like the halfway material, I suppose, intermediate.
Yeah, the middle stuff. Cool. All right, sweet. So they're your AD factors. And there's rates of economic growth overseas, which for that one, it's literally just think of our key trading partners. If they grow in GDP, they're going to need to buy more stuff from us. The danger that a lot of students go through, I notice everyone's dropped their pens. Maybe we're not saying very interesting stuff. You may be adding to your notes. If China's growing in their GDP, a lot of students make the mistake of saying, if China makes more stuff, we buy more stuff. And that's not, and therefore imports increase, blah, blah, blah. What about your purchasing behaviours as someone who shops online is connected to how much China makes? You have no idea how much China's making. It's not going to actually affect your purchasing of imports. What it will affect is the resources that we send China. Because for China to make that more stuff, what are they going to need from us to make that stuff? Resources. They're going to need coal, they're going to need steel, they're going to need agricultural products to feed their people who now have higher incomes. Beef, wheat, barley. Yeah? So be really careful on that one. Okay, coming up for We are behind. Great, I'm going to hurry the bleep up. All right, AS factors. Just my hot tips on productivity growth is I strongly recommend when you're linking to productivity growth, because you can link to either ability or willingness on that one. This is how. If us teachers are more productive, if Mr. Price and I are just super efficient, as Mr. Price and I are super efficient at teaching you, maybe Mr. Khan will go, you know what, maybe we only need one of you. And therefore his cost of production falls, willingness to supply increases, AS increases. That's a bit messy, right? Because it also, if you start to link that productivity to the goal for full employment, you start to tie yourself up in knots. Because you're saying you can fire people, but when AS increases, what happens to GDP? Increases. What happens to the derived demand for labour when GDP increases? Increases. You've just said the derived demand for labour increases, but caused by firing people.
So
You see how that doesn't...
the less people you hire, the more people you hire.
Yeah, so my strong recommendation with productivity is talk about the other side. Since we're so efficient, we can get an extra class. So instead of having 4 classes, we can now educate 5 for the same price. Ability to supply. So I strongly recommend that you talk for productivity. It just means you don't trip yourself up. And that way, all the connections through to the goals work.
And just to jump forward a little bit, that's why we want economic growth, just above like 1% or something. We want it between like 3.5, because that 1% growth might just be through productivity or technological advancements. It doesn't mean more people getting jobs.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what we want. We need that derived demand, because at the end of the day, it's about jobs. All the goals are actually about jobs. And so jobs and income and access to goods and services. And so we want that little bit extra, as you said, absolutely. So people get jobs. All right, I'm going to move on to the goals. You will notice there are sheets of paper on your table that I've handed out. There are 3 per person. Can you quickly allocate those out, please? There should be blank pieces of paper on your table. 3 for each person.
Oh, we're going
And how are you doing this?
do the first one, and then I'll follow your structure.
Okay.
You'll take S, C, G, E.
Yeah.
I'll do it. Yep.
All right. On the very top of one of your pages, can you write? Just at the very top, not the middle, the top. S and S C G. Cool. Very top of one of your 3 pages. You can probably guess what the 3. See, Alex, thank you. What the 3 pages are going to be. Now, I'm not going to go through. We're not going to linearly go through all of these key knowledge points, because if it took us 30 minutes to go through the entire course, then it would only take 30 minutes to go through the entire course. What we're going to do for this section is give you a conceptual 1-pager for the whole goals section. This ideally then will go up at home for you to be able to see at a glance how things connect to each other. The framework that we're going to do here will look familiar for my guys, but we're going to do it for everybody and put it all together. Don't draw this box. This box represents your piece of paper, just to kind of give you an idea of scale.
Sideways.
Yeah, sorry, landscape. Turn it over if you got it. Yeah. It will need to be landscape. You're going to put it on the wall. No, you're going to put it on the wall, so turn it over. Do it again. All right. From here down, all these key knowledge points, I was saying at the start how we can get lost in the detail. From here down, and again, apologies if this is a bit of repetition, but it's probably worthwhile saying. The only content for all of the 3 goals here are a grouping of 3 different things. What the goal is, things that change the goal, and when the performance of that goal changes, what are the consequences? And so we're going to briefly talk about all these in a conceptual, visual way to kind of get it all together. And the way I represent that is I'll put a box in the middle which kind of represents what the goal is. So for strong and sustainable economic growth, that includes the meaning, measurement, and that's it. Cool? Meaning and measurement. So what do we mean by the meaning? So the meaning is, for strong and sustainable economic growth, is essentially your definition. Now what I'm finding is we're kind of some of us are getting a little confused as to when do I use the worded parts of the strong and sustainable economic growth goal. For example, we all should know by now, and marking your practice sacks, we've got some work to do on this, what the target range for strong and sustainable economic growth. 3 to 3.5%. Cool? It's 3 to 3.5%. But it's more than that, isn't it? And the context behind where that number comes from is over time, economists have realised that is the highest rate of economic growth that we can get before 3 little things happen. What are they? Inflation, external pressures, and environmental degradation. So, yes, the number is important, and that's our indicator. When GDP is within that range, history has shown us that those 3 things aren't too much of a concern. And this is where I need you to go beyond just memorization of the goal and actually kind of deep down think, what does that actually mean? Well, it means we want as much production as possible for what Mr. Price was saying before with jobs. Production goes up, derived demand for labour goes up. Great. We would have that at 400% if we could. But then we'd have some bad stuff happen. And so we can't have 400%. We have 3 to 3.5.
So just the government's goal here, is to improve living standards. And through that percentage, they're able to improve living standards. So less than that, we won't have income growth. Maybe the government can spend less on helping out society, so through healthcare and things like that. And then if it's too high, then we have less purchasing power, high inflation. You guys can buy less stuff, then living standards worsen. So that window there is the best for your living standards.
So if, for example, and we had this in our practice sack, when we get to unemployment a bit later on, we didn't hit that target range of 4.25% in any of the 2-year period. However, if we can get lower unemployment than 4.25 and not run into excessively inflation concerns, well, we've achieved the goal. The percentage is important, but it's an indicator to get back to living standards.
And it used to be higher.
It
used to be...
It was 5% when I started teaching.
5%. But we've operated at lower, especially during COVID. Unemployment was quite low. And then it was like, oh, it's actually not too bad. So they've adjusted that to make it. It was 4.5, I think, at one stage, and now it's down to 4.25.
Yeah. All right, cool. Very quickly. Measuring real GDP. Pretty simple. We've got nominal GDP, and we're going to go through this maybe, but we take nominal GDP and then we strip out the inflation, and then that gives you the real GDP, because we actually need to know how much of that GDP growth is from making more stuff and not just prices going up. Cool? Yeah.
So if we do have the inflation data, do we use do we just assume that it's low, or do we use current?
Yeah, so what you can do here is, you need to get to real GDP?
No, for strong and sustainable, like the example you used with unemployment. You know how you said, as long as there's no inflationary pressures, we can assume.
Yeah, you're not going to get that question on the sack. Just very, very quickly, the context behind that. As you all know, the practice sack you did was last year's actual sack. And the data since then has moved a year. And last year, there was a time that we were above and below the goal. And so the question made sense. So that's a little bit on me. But yeah, don't worry too much about it. You won't have that issue next week. Cool, so we strip out inflation. You'll notice it doesn't say causes of GDP, but I'm here to tell you it's really easy. Change in AS, change in AD, that's it. So any time a question is asking, how does this affect GDP or achievement of the strong and sustainable economic growth goal, you know you need to go through AD or AS first. Through the process that we will take you through a little bit later, but is on your bookmarks. Factor, AD, sorry, if it's AD, factor, component, formula, AD, or AS, factor, ability, willingness, GDP AS. Cool? Now on consequences, do you understand, by the way, why that's on the left-hand side? Because it's like feeding in. This affects this. Cool? No?
Like a question about the AD factors. Would you have to say feel like increase or decrease in like the aggregate demand equation?
Yes, always. Because the question will be like, will this increase or decrease GDP?
Would you say like how much to buy as well?
Sorry?
Would you say how much to buy as well?
No. Just a directional thing, isn't it? Yep. All right. So on consequences, I'm going to expand my little box here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. So if we have too much GDP, then we've got, I wonder what these first three are going to be. Inflation. What else?
External pressure.
External pressures.
Degradation.
I wonder what the third one is. Environmental degradation.
Unemployment.
Cool. So you don't have to learn new information. What's one consequence of having too much GDP? Well, it's in our definition. These ones. And then just for funsies, they've thrown in another one here, and this goes back to the derived demand for labour. So this is if it's GDP is too high, too high, too high. If GDP is too low, we have unemployment. And that's due to derived demand for labour, which we write as DDL. I'm not sure if you guys do it in your prices classes, but DDL, derived demand for labour. If I'm not making stuff, I don't need people to make it. Cool. All right. There's a one-pager for you. Some people are we nearly... That's it, by the way, for strong and sustainable economic growth. So any question on strong and sustainable economic growth is up there. Cool. All right, we're going to move on. New page, and we're going to go to...
So what would you have for full employment? I just like hate structure this, obviously too high, inflation, blah blah.
I'm just going to say like, so in the box, meaning, classifications, measurement.
Yeah.
It's equivalent to structural causes
Oh, okay, cool.
and consequences of. I'll link something.
Sweet. Alright, so we are going to do pretty much the exact same thing, and the setup is going to be the exact same thing. However, it's going to be...
New page.
Sorry, yeah, new page. Hey, and then make it landscape, not portrait.
New page.
And then, I'll be honest, I didn't set it up like this normally, so then I asked Mr. Grant, hey, how would I set this up? And then he just pointed to the textbook. So if you're unsure of this, what a great teacher, hey?
You've got two, yep. Yep, cool.
Cool.
You don't need us.
So, I thought I was magnetic, it's not. So, what is going to be our inputs for full employment? Looking at the textbook. Yeah, that is cyclical employment, unemployment, and then the other one is structural unemployment. So,
The words in the study design / textbook say types. Are they types? No, what's the word? Yeah, it just says the differences between cyclical and structural unemployment. It's the cause. It's the cause, okay?
and then cyclical is in relation to the business cycle. What is structural? Cool. So, for example, I spoke about my friend who was in events, corporate events. He lost his job during COVID because they stopped going to the races. Yeah? And then he had to get a new job. He's now a chippy. That is an example of a carpenter. Sorry, I did that before. Chippy, sparky, type C. No, that doesn't work. But structural is when the skills don't match up what's needed. Okay? And then what is full employment? Can somebody tell me?
Which one?
So the measurement, so we'll go with like Nauru if you'd like to.
Oh yeah, the lowest rate of employment that does not accelerate inflation.
So it is the non-acceleratory inflation rate of unemployment?
Yeah.
Yes, cool. So that would,
Yeah, non-accelerating inflation rate.
that's kind of like the complicated, it just means the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, we'll talk about this maybe why high employment or low unemployment creates inflation in a second. Yep.
So do we use the definition of like whoever wants a job has a job and cyclical unemployment is 0%?
What do you mean, sorry?
The alternate definition in the textbook, like whoever wants a job has a job and cyclical unemployment is 0%.
My issue with that is we're never going to be able to know if cyclical unemployment is 0.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a conceptual definition, to be completely honest. So I would recommend against that.
Should I be concerned that in BCA sample answers they might use that one?
No, because they're all stupidly long and ridiculous anyway. Just with Nauru, it can be a little bit confusing. I actually think the words are around the wrong way.
Yeah.
So if you think of Nauru, not as how it's said, but you put this first, start here. It's the rate of unemployment that doesn't accelerate inflation. I find it much easier to understand.
Do you want to talk about wage spirals? Is that going to jump ahead?
Meaning, measurement, and is there another one in there? Oh, that's in the box.
Yeah, okay. Oh, so classification here, yeah?
It's really bad.
Alright, so in our box we have meaning, measurement, and classifications. So measurement would just be 4.25% or
425.
yeah. Alright, classification. Yeah, Noah.
We did put 4.25 or 4%.
It's between there, so I'm happy with 4% or 4.25%.
We don't know where it is. Because at the end of the day, Nauru is the important part. And as Mr. Price said earlier, it used to be 5%. But then we hit 5%. And it didn't accelerate inflation. And so economists are like, oh, it must be 4.5%. And so we hit 4.5%. And it didn't accelerate inflation. And the big reason in Australian economy, and also advanced economies around the world, is this idea of underemployment, where the underemployed aren't visible in the unemployment rate. And so if we think about why, I'm kind of stealing your thunder here a bit, but if we think about why low unemployment might accelerate inflation, well, it comes around to scarcity of available labour. And if everyone, as Sandy said, who wants a job has a job, and you want to expand your factory and you put an ad out on Seek, no one's going to apply because they already have jobs. So what are you going to have to do to attract them? You're going to have to pay them more. And then we've just learned about, have we? No. Cost of inflation, they're going to pass that on in form of higher prices, and that's how it accelerates.
Just to quickly draw that, yeah. So I'm going to get paid more for going to a private school. Yay, go me. Guess what? I get paid more. I'm going to consume more. AD has, yeah, AD goes up. AD 2, guess what? Prices have gone up. Oh no, inflationary pressures. And that is just going to be a vicious cycle where my purchasing power has decreased. Therefore, I'm going to ask for more money, and we are getting closer and closer to our maximum capacity. Cool. Do you want to jump in? I just don't.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
So, the full employment one, out of all of them, I personally want you to focus, the percentage is important as an indicator of are we achieving or not. But at the moment, we're at about 4.1% unemployment. We're pretty close to the goal. And it would be tough for you to argue we've missed the goal. It'd be very tough for you to argue we're so close to it and we're not achieving it. Because at the moment, it's not accelerating inflation. It might be contributing to inflation, but it's not accelerating it. And that's your argument.
Was the, like, on the practice sec, is that not, like, recent data? It was on the practice sec, said 3.7%. Well, on the graph.
Sure. It was last week, Gutta.
If it's like, if we're that close to the goal, would we ever say that we're getting closer to the goal on a question? Or
You can say on balance, since it's not accelerating inflation, on balance we've achieved the goal. However, for that question, the majority of the time was actually lower than that, and you could have argued that since that was mid-threes, percentage-wise, that probably is getting close to accelerating, so not achieving the goal. Nuance is important here.
They're right. GP.
Yeah, cool. So classifications, I've got to be honest, just memorise them. Yeah, so the classifications within the labour force that we've got things like, you know, employed, unemployed, hidden, long-term, just remember them. It's usually multiple choice, let's be honest for that stuff. Measurement is your calculations. So what we're going to do is on Friday, we're going to give you a handout with all of the calculations on one sheet. Just to like, here it is, learn them so you can do them. Cool? All right, and then we've got consequences. So if we have too much unemployment. Yes.
Yeah.
Too much, and this is where it's confusing, just too much unemployment. Take a moment. Is that lots of people have jobs or not many have jobs? Just think, don't yell at it, everyone thinks at different speeds. Too much unemployment, just think. Is that good or bad for the economy? That's bad. Not enough people have jobs. Cool.
So what happens is there is a reduction in living standards. I think Mr. Graham said the same thing. Material living standards are easy to talk about. It's quantifiable. So that could be, you know, income. It can be referenced in real GDP. Yeah, it's quantifiable. Yeah. Whereas non-material living standards, who can tell me a consequence of unemployment being high for non-material living standards?
Increase in crime rates.
Yeah, in crime rates. It could be stress. It could be a range of things. Yeah. The other thing living standards are impacted is I am not going to be saving money for the future. My rainy day fund has gone. I am just spending money right now to make sure I'm not getting kicked out of my house. That is bad for living standards in the future because I just can't afford to worry about next week when I have, you know, groceries to pay for. Yeah, and then as well, GDP, yeah? So, So, GDP, I feel like that makes sense when we're looking at either AD or AS. If unemployment is too high, there's going to be less consumption, yeah? There is going to be a reduction in real GDP. And to flow on to that, what happens if I am not earning money? What do I stop paying? Taxes. Guess what? Income tax is, I think, the government's biggest revenue source. Is it 60%? I thought it was around 50%, 60%. There you go. The government wants me to work. If unemployment is too high, they get sad. The tax man, they'll come for you, I promise you, but yeah.
Tax person.
Oh, thank you. And then inflation can go two ways. If unemployment is too low, so it's going to be like 1%, it creates this flow-on effect. Anyone know what this is called? Wage spiral, yeah? Because stuff's more expensive, I demand more money. Prices go up, I demand more money, yeah? So my purchasing power, everyone's purchasing power decreases, they demand more money. Cool. And then if unemployment is too high, then inflation will be too low, which is bad for living standards and so on. Cool.
Cool. Final page, low and stable inflation.
Because everything links to inflation. In the end, it doesn't.
All right. Meaning.
Just while Mr. Graham is drawing us on the board, please don't confuse inflation with GDP growth. They are different things. I've had a few students in responses kind of use those terms interchangeably. They are not the same thing. What is inflation?
Average increase in price over time.
Yeah, so the change in price of goods. It's not 100% linked to GDP growth.
Because it depends how that GDP growth was gotten. If that GDP growth was as a result of aggregate supply increasing, well, that's going to decrease prices. Because AD is going to increase. So keep them separate. All right, meaning of the goal. This one is much simpler. This one we do, you know, something with full employment, like the number is important, but it's more the NAIRU. Here, it's pretty much the number, 2 to 3%. Cool? If you have an evaluate question, you can use the fact that there's a part of the definition that says it's an average of 2 to 3% over the course of the business cycle. So if we have some charted information and it just dips a little bit into 2 to 3% and then out, but over the course of 2 to 3 years, which is generally considered to be the business cycle, overall they haven't achieved it. But in that part they did. But overall on balance they did. We want prices to go up a little bit at a time. So that's meaning. Types is the ones we talked about at the start with inflation, disinflation and deflation, so I'm not going to go over that. Put it in if you want to, actually do write it in for you, inflation, disinflation, deflation. And then the measurement is to CPI. Do you need to calculate the CPI? Hell no, it's over 100,000 products. There's no way you can do that. What you will need to do is growth rates. So in that calculations one pager we're going to all go through on Friday, that'll have how to calculate a growth rate. We should have gone through it in class already, but we're going to remind you of that. It's a really common question. And for those that had a time to do the multiple choice in the practice sec, they would have, I think that was inflation, where it was like, what's the inflation rate? Index 1, index 2, growth rate. Cool, those that do general maths, you should be fine. Cool, those that do spec, you're in trouble because it's maths with numbers, not letters. All right. So, causes of inflation, there are only two.
That was the objective of good job.
Cost and demand. And this is the thing where I think we've taught you maybe too much detail, and again, you need to step back a little bit.
I'll draw.
So on the AS side is what we call cost inflation. This is the really simple one, all right? The really simple one, which is essentially, if I'm a firm and I'm making bubble tea, and with wages and tapioca balls and the plastic cups and all those kinds of things, it costs me $4, cost, $4 to make a large bubble tea. And I'm charging my customers 10. What's my profit? $6. Let's say the price of tapioca balls goes up. And now, and look at my hands, this is cost, this is price. Now my cost goes up $1 to $5. Now I'm losing $1. I don't like that. I want to, and this is the phrase I would like you to write down next to cost inflation, I would like to maintain my profit margins. So what do I do to price? I increase it. That is it, okay? It is very simple. I don't know about Mr. Price's class, but I'm getting a lot of students talk about shortages and surpluses in cost inflation. Do not use those words in cost inflation, please. You're thinking it's helping you, Nemo, but it's not. Difference between cost and price. And if it helps you with the hands little thing, then so be it. So if your cause factor is an AS factor, you're just going to go through cost inflation. It also works the other way. If my cost of production is now $5, and now I'm selling bubble tea for 11, and my cost of production falls down to $3, there's been some productivity gains in the manufacturing of tapioca balls. They make them from dirt. Well, in theory, to maintain competitiveness, because the bubble tea market is a really competitive market. So what do you think I'm going to do now to maintain competitiveness to my price? I'm going to lower that and make $5 again. So your reason is maintaining profit margins, but if cost of production falls, well then your reason is to improve competitiveness whilst maintaining profit margins. Cool? So I just want that little bit extra in there for that one. Cool. On the demand side, if your cause factor is from a demand factor, you're going to go through demand, and this is really, as Mr. Price is about to draw, what you learnt in microeconomics. So I remember way back when economics was easy. And we learnt if the demand for a particular good or service increases, look around the stores. You know, if you're the bubble tea store and the demand for bubble tea goes up for whatever reason, look at your store. Do you have, like, are your supplies completely empty with lines around the corner? Or are your shelves full with no customers if demand has increased? You're empty. So do you have not enough or too much bubble tea? Not enough. And so what do you do to capitalise on that? You increase your price. And the remaining customers who are there fight amongst each other for the remaining bubble tea. We call that phrase bid up prices. Consumers bid up prices. So that idea is exactly the same, but instead of the bubble tea market, it's all markets. And we use the language, instead of just saying surpluses, we say this creates widespread surpluses, or this creates widespread shortages. To which either firms increase price, or consumers bid up the price, or firms drop price to clear the surplus, thereby decreasing or increasing inflation. Okay, so surplus shortage language goes here. Sorry, widespread. Cool beans? Sweet. All right. Be really careful of that. I'm noticing a lot of students are mixing those up, so I've done something in my teaching to make that a little bit confusing because it's popping up a lot. So I want to make sure that stops now. Or I'll be abusive and hit you over the head with something. Hypothetically, I wouldn't do that. Consequences of not achieving the goal. Oh, we've got 7 of these suckers. 5 and 2. Why have I done 5 and 2? Well, when unemployment is too high, we have 5 things that happen, and when unemployment is low, we have 2. So 7 things is really hard to remember, but 5 and 2 is a bit easier. Cool? 5 and 2 is a bit easier. So I want you to kind of distinguish all of those things into 5 and 2. So when we have not enough people when we have prices that are too high, the main one is erosion of purchasing power. That's the main one. Pardon me. You'll notice, like, development of a wage price spiral that Mr. Price explained really well. Why does that happen? Why do workers go in and ask for pay rises? Because they've had erosion of their purchasing power.
And to link back, disposable income hasn't changed.
Yeah. Nominal.
Yes.
Yeah, nominal income, they're getting the same amount, but they can just do less with it, which is erosion of purchasing power. The example I used in class on that was coffee. If I have $10 in my pocket and coffee is $5, I go into the store, I can buy 2 coffees. Then we live in a terrible economy where prices have doubled overnight. I have $10 in my pocket, coffees are now $10. How many coffees can I buy? 1. My purchasing power has fallen. My nominal income hasn't changed. I've still got $10. But what I can get with that falls. And as a result, that flows into all the other 4. Right? So Mr. Price talked about the wage price spiral. Distortion of spending and investment decisions. If I'm thinking to invest in a company, well, the profit that I get back from that company, in real terms, adjusted for inflation, in the future is going to be less. So if I expect $4,000 a month in dividends from the company I've invested in, well, I'm going to get that $4,000, but it's going to be less in the future. And so what do I do instead with my money? Where am I going to put that money?
Crypto.
Definitely not crypto. Oh, maybe crypto.
Well, volatile assets that keep their value
Yeah.
low during times of.
Yeah, that's why crypto doesn't work. Doesn't keep its value. But things like gold, precious art, things that over time have been shown to hold their value in line with inflation. And that does nothing for living standards.
Yeah, what's better, investing money in a brick or a company? Yeah, for everybody else, we want investments going back into the economy. Gold doesn't do that. So it worsens allocation of resources and living standards. Well, it's not selfish, well, it is selfish,
It
but you've got to act in your own best interest.
Because one might say
So it's
that part of
rational-
key
it's
action
rational,
is rational economic decision making.
Yeah, it's rational.
Bounded self-interest, baby. Well, not bounded. Self-interest. Anyway, cool. Lower returns on investment is just the same thing, but with money. Cool. That $10 that this is like two things. That that money that I invest will be worth the interest I get back for that will be less in the future. But it's also, this is lower returns on investment. If there's high inflation, what economic conditions is that around? Is that an economic condition where people are going to buy lots or not buy lots? High inflation. Will that cause people to buy more or buy less? Buy less. So if I do invest in that factory, well, that factory is going to make less stuff in the future because of the inflationary effects. There's going to be a lower return on that investment for me. So you can think of it money or actual investments in companies. Cool. The final one, we talked about unemployment for this one here, but delayed consumption. This one here essentially is now. Delayed consumption is if we have too low inflation. I want you to imagine deflation. Prices going backwards. Caitlin, this is going to work well because I'm going to use this. Let's say this water bottle today is $30 and I am in the market for a water bottle. But I know over the past 6 months prices have gone backwards. Do I go in and buy this water bottle today? I'm going to wait because tomorrow it might be 25. And you can see how this feeds into itself. If people don't consume, what happens to production? Decreases. What happens to derived demand for labour? Decreases. What happens to levels of unemployment? Okay, so it all comes back to jobs.
Answer structures.
All right. Answer structures. I'm going to hand out. You already have this, but I thought it was worthwhile having a printed copy that's nice and big that you can put up at home. This is the second slide of the revision slides document. It goes through how to link to the goals. This is your reward for going. Oh, sorry. No, you don't get one. No. You're asking too many questions.
Anyone get one?
We were a little optimistic. Thanks. Okay. So, thanks everybody. This is overwhelming. Okay? It's a little overwhelming. But what I want you to do is eventually throw this in the bin. Eventually. We talked about building a little earlier. If you're building a house and you've just started and you've just got the walls up and there's not a whole lot of support in the house, what does that building company, if it's a tall building, put around it? What do they call those things? Anyone know? They call it scaffolding.
Not a moat, that's the water.
Yeah, true. So, does anyone, when you rode a bike, have those little wheels on the side? Training wheels. Does anyone have those when they rode a bike? Yeah? I had them for a little bit too long. I was special. I still am. We've got 10 more minutes and then you can go and do whatever you like. Well, you can actually go down if you want, but I prefer you to stay. Those training wheels or that scaffolding is designed to support the building or the rider until they don't need it anymore and then they go. And that's something like this. Use it as long as you need. Before next to the door. But the idea is, you get to a position where you stop looking at it. But it's not cheating by looking at it when you're doing practice questions. Yeah? So, how do we navigate this? Well, you'll see you've got the 3 goals at the top. Little hot tip, when do I talk about... Oh, you love that, come on. You shake your head, but you love it. I often get the question, and it's a very good one, when do I actually link to the goals? Because a lot of students are linking through to, oh, this moves us closer to or further away from the goal, when they don't need to. And my hot tip is, when it uses the word goal in the question, that's when you use it. There will be questions next week that ask you to link to a change in GDP. There will be potential, these are all potential by the way, I actually can't remember. There may be questions next week that ask you to link to a change in inflation. And there may be questions next week that ask you to link to a change in unemployment. For all 3 of those, you are not doing that final link to the goal. Because it didn't ask you about the goal. But if the word goal is in the question, you're doing exactly what you would ordinarily done, but then do that whole closer to or further away because we are currently above or below. That little sentence.
You get the question on like low and stable inflation or like full employment that doesn't link to goals, and it's just like...
No, because they'll say inflation. They won't say the low and stable. They won't say full employment. They'll say unemployment. Cool? Thanks, Mary. Is that clear with everybody? That hopefully clears up a bit of confusion. And then, so if the question does say goal, you're going to figure out which goal it is. Now, one thing that isn't here is factor. Okay, it doesn't actually say link to factor, but on your bookmark it does. But I would assume that you would know, well, how am I going to change? Let's say it's low inflation goal. Cool. How am I going to say that a component of the equation is changed? Well, you're going to have to go to a factor first. And then you give me private consumption usually, or exports or imports. Then, does this increase or decrease AD? And then we talk about surpluses and shortages like we did before. Notice, for the AS side, this little box to the right-hand side of the one I just went through, does that mention anything about shortages or surpluses? No, so stop bloody writing about them on the AS side. I know what some of you are trying to do. You're trying to show the assessor, hey, I'm really smart, I know lots of stuff. But it actually has the opposite effect. When you write things that are not what they are looking for and don't follow a natural progression of this happens because of this reason, which then causes this. If you start talking about shortages and surpluses when you shouldn't, it's a clue to the assessor that you're guessing.
Like word vomit.
Yeah.
Like I'm just throwing enough on the page, hopefully something sticks.
And you're not going to get full marks. They're just going to be like, yeah, it's kind of there, 3. Right? 1 idea, 1 mark. This happens for this reason. New line in your response. Cool. For some of these, it's got things in quotation marks. So you'll notice for the AD side for strong and sustainable economic growth and on the full employment one, there are things in quotation marks. These are pretty strong clues for phrases we want to see in your responses. So anytime you're linking to a change in unemployment, you really need to talk about the derived demand for labour. Now you can use different words if you want that mean the same thing, that's fine. You can say things like, firms will need more workers. Fine, not a problem. I'm not sure what language you used, but whatever language it is, I don't mind. The fancy way that makes you sound smart is this. So let's do that one. So with those quotation marks, it's a nice little succinct phrase that you can use to explain those relationships. Awesome. So that's the goals. We're going to wrap up soon. The final idea here of closer to and further away. For my classes, we're almost there on how to do this well. Some are already doing it, so not everybody in the room needs to listen to this next bit. Anytime goal is in the question, the word goal, I want you to fully define the goal for me, please. Fully. The worded bits too. Your strong and sustainable is a big one, I know. It's got the highest amount of economic growth whilst not contributing to inflationary pressures, external pressures, and environmental degradation. I get it. Generally considered to be 3 to 3.5%. I know it's long. And you're not always going to get a mark for it either. But sometimes you will. And this is one area of past exams that have been really inconsistent in the marking guides. And so we just want to have an insurance policy in there. There might be a mark for an understanding of the goal, but there might not be. So don't allocate a mark to it when you're doing your planning. So if that's a 4-mark goal question, how many ideas are you going to have? You're going to have 5. Because one of them is going to be definition of the goal, but you're not going to allocate a mark to it.
I'm sure Mr. Graham has said, but the people who write the exam are not the people who allocate the marks to the exam.
Correct.
So it's a bit of a guessing game, so you just want to cover your ass.
Yep. And then so in that final mark, you can just plonk the definition at the top if you want. The higher quality response would be to integrate it into that final idea of is it closer to or further away from the goal. And again, a few of my guys are trying to be really smart and saying with the GDP goal, for example, as GDP is low, that's going to improve environmental degradation, therefore help us achieve the goal. But the main vibe behind this is production. So I want you to talk about the GDP percentage movement as the main indicator of achievement or non-achievement. For unemployment, I want you to talk about the unemployment rate, not inflation, unless you have to. And then for inflation, I want you to talk about CPI. Cool. So the indicator is the primary one to use, and you're going to use language like this if it's a strong and sustainable economic growth. This will assist in the achievement, because the question is normally like, how does this assist in the achievement? This will help assist achievement of the goal. You've already said what's happened to GDP. You're saying GDP is gone. This will this will assist achievement of the goal. And then you tell me what the goal definition is, which is the highest rate of economic growth without running into inflationary pressures, external pressures, and environmental degradation, generally considered to be 3 to 3.5%, as we are currently below it. There's 3 components to this final mark. Cool? 3 components. Closer, further away. Definition. Where we currently are. I see 3 people writing that down. I feel that would be something you would want to write down. Closer to, further away. This is all for 1 mark, your final mark for achievement questions. Closer to, further away. Full definition of the goal, including the target percentage and all the words. Full employment, give me the NIRE one. And then where we are, as we are currently above it or as we are currently below it. Those 3 things give us everything that we need. No.
Over the weekend, can we send you questions?
Yeah, whether I mark them or not is another thing, but I will try. Yes. For mine, I will have a deadline of Sunday night. Anything received by Sunday night, I will try. I don't want to use the word guarantee. I will work through it in the order of which I receive them. Anything after Sunday, because as my guys know, I've got many of you, after Sunday, I will try to get through it. Cool? But Sunday, I'll make a commitment that before the stack, I will give you feedback.
I'm sorry.
Don't forget where practice questions are found. Where are they? Where on the site, though? So what documents do we have available to find practice questions? Past exam questions in the revision section of the site. What else have we got? We've got practice sacks. There are 3 or 4 of them, 4 of them on the site. Most of which are past McKinnon papers. There's one CPAP in there, one just to screw with you. For the old ones, I think there's 2 old ones. The data's old, so if you want to do those, just make a choice on if you want to use updated data or just use the data that's there. You just make that call. Either's fine. It's the process that you're practicing. So we've got past exam questions in the exam revision section of the site. We've got 4 practice sacks with solutions on them. We also have your purple booklet, weekly practice questions, which I'm sure not everybody's done. Every question and the alternative ones. Cool. Plus there's a practice sack in the back of your chapter of the textbook with solutions available online. Does everyone know where to find solutions for this textbook? The website is on the inside cover. Cool.
And then there's the general questions for every key knowledge point as well.
Oh yeah, within the subtopic section of the site as well.
So maybe like 100 questions, maybe even
Easy.
150. Mr. Graham's guaranteed Sunday night, he'll give you feedback. So do all 150.
Don't tempt me.
What was I going to say? However, so you don't kill me. The focus is not quantity of work. Because if you can thoughtfully go through each question, applying the recommended answer structures 2 or 3 times for each skill, you're going to get to the sack on Thursday and you're going to fly through it. Right? So please, I wouldn't recommend doing a timed practice sack until the very last thing. This is slow at the start, focusing on embedding process. Cool beans? Yeah.
So by Friday, we need to and also the alternative.
Yeah, that's just my classes. Yeah, for my classes, just as a reminder, my expectation is by Friday's class, your SAC notes are done, and I want to see them. You've got all day tomorrow.
Oh yeah.
SAC notes are done. Your revision slides document is done, and all of the questions in the purple weekly practice question books are done by Friday. That means you can focus on the questions that are on the site. All good? Hey, huge effort. Over 25 of you all up here today at the start. We lost some midway through. It's this stuff, you being here till 5 o'clock, that means when you get that study score result in December, you're not going to look back and be like, I wish I had done. Yeah? You limit your regret by stepping up. And that's what every single one of you has done in here. Your scores will all be different. It's not about the scores. What I would hate for you is for you to get to that position and have regret. And you're taking steps today to minimise that regret. One could say you're minimising your opportunity cost. One could say that. I wouldn't.
Keep in mind, Mr. Graham has worn the hat the entire hour and a half as well.
I mean, it's true, economics is everywhere. So, anyway. All right, be out of here, chums. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
I just have a question.